President Barroso, Van Rompuy, Prime Minister Leterme, Professor Schwab. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Stephen Kinnock. I'm the director of the Europe and Central Asia team in the World Economic Forum, and I'm honored to welcome you today to the World Economic Forum on Europe. I would like to start by thanking the government of Belgium. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Leterme has just been caught in Brussels traffic and will be with us very shortly. But I'd like to thank him in his absence for his great cooperation in co-hosting this meeting with us. In spite of the somewhat turbulent times that the Belgian government has been going through, they've been unfaltering in their support, and we're profoundly grateful for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we meet today at a critical juncture for the future of Europe. The gentlemen on this stage and the entire political leadership of the EU are facing a range of challenges that are arguably more daunting than anything we've seen since the creation of the European Community. The World Economic Forum is therefore proud to have gathered you, Europe's leaders, to confront these challenges together. Now more than ever, we must recall the aspirations that drove the creation of the European project, and it is in that spirit of partnership and dialogue that the World Economic Forum welcomes you to Brussels today. It now gives me great pleasure to wish you every success for the coming days and to give the floor to Professor Schwab, who will chair this opening plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's quite a historical moment. We are here co-shaping history in some way. And I have to say, as someone who has been committed to the European idea since his youth, I feel very proud of what has been achieved last night. I think it's a great act of European solidarity. And I would like to express our deep appreciation on behalf of the European and the global economy to all those who have negotiated so hard over the last days and hours. And I'm particularly pleased that this morning we have the two personalities and afterwards Prime Minister Leterme with us who really represent Europe at the top level and in its best way. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome José Manuel Barroso, the President of the European Commission, and also Herman van Rompuy, the President of the European Council of the European Union. We will discuss during the next hour, of course, the outcome of the negotiations of this night, but we will also look at the more longer-term issues, and I'm sure we will have a very lively discussion. I first would be honored. Bonjour. Good morning, Prime Minister. I was just saying it's very encouraging to see how democratic Belgium it is when the Prime Minister can still be struck in traffic. But let's first hear from President Barroso how he evaluates the outcome of the negotiations of the crisis package and how he feels what it means for Europe and for the world at large.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Schwab. Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here immediately after such an historic decision was taken. In fact, after Friday's Euro Area Summit, this morning, so in less than 48 hours, the European Union took a very historic decision. Based on a mandate we have received from the Euro Area Summit, the Commission yesterday made a proposal. We had an extraordinary meeting in the afternoon, and the ECOFIN ministers, so finance and economic ministers of the European Union, have agreed an important package for the stability of the euro. We have stated that we'll do whatever is necessary to defend the stability of the euro, and we have done just that. This morning's deal, it was at 2:15 a.m. This morning's deal is based on a proposal the Commission made during its extraordinary session Sunday morning. It creates a mechanism to assist euro area members with loans guaranteed by the European budget. In addition, it provides assistance guaranteed by participating member states. The total amount of approximately 500 billion euros is unprecedented in its scale. This should also be seen in conjunction with measures announced by the ECB and also with possible participation of the IMF. There is, as you know, the commitment of the IMF to come to a participation of around half of what the member states contribute. So we can say that in the space of 48 hours, the European Union has concluded an agreement that enables us to respond in a coordinated, fast, effective manner to difficulties in any euro area member state. This morning's agreement will ensure that any attempt to weaken the stability of the euro will fail. It shows the determination of the whole of the European Union to stand behind any of its member states when they are seriously threatened with severe difficulties caused by exceptional circumstances beyond their control. But this deal was not only about assistance, it was also about further efforts of consolidation. I welcome the clear commitments made by some member states to take additional measures of fiscal consolidation soon. The combination of budgetary efforts by countries under pressure and assistance by the others is what I have been calling a consolidation pact for the euro area. You know that the Commission has long been making the case for reinforced economic governance. We have stated from many years now that at the end we cannot have a monetary union without an economic union. This is the point. We need stronger coordination, economic policy coordination. And until now, the response of the member states has been in this direction, understanding that the solution for this problem is a more coordinated Europe, more coherence, economic policy coordination, and that is why the Commission will present this Wednesday some proposals for reinforced economic governance and also for reinforced compliance with Stability and Growth Pact. We will propose to broaden surveillance of macroeconomic imbalances and reinforce our competitiveness, and we will also put on the table some ideas for a permanent crisis management mechanism. This mechanism that was adopted this morning was for these very exceptional circumstances we're facing. It was based on Article 122. It's a specific article of our treaties. Moreover, we'll intensify our ongoing work on a more robust, more transparent regulation of financial markets. We will push the agenda, this agenda in the G20. As we know, the European Union was also at the beginning of this process at summit level of the G20. And as you know, but I'm sure President Van Rompuy will speak about this, the European Union also has asked President Van Rompuy to chair a task force to look at some of these aspects. So for me, the lesson from this crisis is clear. We need a stronger union in economic policy, stronger compliance by member states with policies and rules agreed at union level. This is now underway. We'll undertake every effort to take it further. I think the lesson from this crisis is if you want a monetary union, you should promote also an economic union. That does not mean every member state making exactly the same at the same time, but it certainly means reinforced economic governance and respect of all the obligations the member states have under the Stability and Growth Pact.
Thank you, Mr. President Barroso. You mentioned in a very encouraging way that the European Union will draw the lessons. And if we look back to history, crises always have been the catalysts for improvements. President Van Rompuy, you are chairing this task force. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and share with us your views on the present crisis and how it is mastered?
Thank you, Professor. I think the decisions of yesterday evening and even of tomorrow are indeed, as President Barroso said, historic decisions. The European Union can act. We overcame the financial crisis. We will overcome the crisis inside the Eurozone. The European Union can act if needed. That's the most important fact of these days. Second, we had a very important meeting of the Eurozone Friday evening. And there is one sentence which is crucial in our decision on Friday. All the institutions of the euro area, the Council, the Commission, the European Central Bank, as well as all euro area member states agree to use the full range of means available to ensure the stability of the euro area. I think each of them took their responsibilities. Yesterday, the ECOFIN Council on far-reaching proposals of the Commission, very courageous, far-reaching. And the European Central Bank will announce his initiatives, I think, in a few hours. So all the institutions of the euro area are collaborating in the same aim to save the stability of the Eurozone, the second biggest currency in the world. And the last months, we worked on two paths, one of solidarity and one of responsibility. Responsibility with the measures taken in Greece, for instance, also a far-reaching and very courageous package of measures to change not only the way in which the budget is managed in Greece, but change the culture and even society in Greece. And responsibility, of course, on the side of the European Union, stronger economic governance. I will say a few words on this later on. And then the other side was, on the other side was solidarity. Solidarity with Greece, a conditional package of 110 billion euros, and now those two new initiatives with a stabilization package of a stabilization fund managed by the Commission and an intergovernmental fund, both of them for a huge amount of 500 billion euros, with half of them would be added by the the International Monetary Fund. So, solidarity and responsibility. We had to do this. Now, the other question of Professor Schwab about the task force. The task force, and also that we decided in our meeting of Friday evening. First, broaden and strengthen economic surveillance and policy coordination in the euro area, including by paying close attention to debt levels and competitiveness developments. Second, reinforce the rules and procedures for surveillance of euro area member states, including through a strengthening of the Stability and Growth Pact and more effective sanctions. And third, create a robust framework for crisis management, respecting the principle of member states' own budgetary responsibility. These are the three targets, the three objectives. We will start our work on May the 21st and end in October for the European Council of October. We will accelerate our work. We have a lot of ideas. The Commission will provide some new ideas this week on Wednesday. I myself have also concrete proposals to make, and I think that also others will do it. So we would put all this together and have a real, and I hope, radical package ready for the European Council of October. Crises are challenges. We proved that we were ready to be very courageous these last days, and we have to be very courageous also in the proposals I will make on behalf of the task force in the view of a stronger economic, not only governance, but even government in some way, so that the Eurozone is stabilized for a very, very long period. The Eurozone was a major achievement of the European Union. I think the biggest achievement since the launching of the European Community in 1958. So we have a huge responsibility in defending not only the Eurozone, but deepening the Eurozone. We can't have a monetary union at the end without some form of economic, of political union. And that is our big task for the coming weeks and the coming months.
After having criticized for a too timid approach to handling the crisis, I see now a real commitment for fast, decisive and comprehensive action. Now, Prime Minister Leterme, you as the Prime Minister of one of the member countries, how do you react to it? How do you see it?
First of all, I'm glad that the decision was made finally yesterday evening and tonight. So I think, like was mentioned before, crises are challenges. And the most important fact is that there is a very impressive decision. And I just heard that the news that the reaction of the markets is going the right way. This is very important. I remember when saving the private banks in Belgium, that's the Monday morning when markets were opening, the reaction was much more timid. So I think it's a very important positive effect of what has been decided. But like the President of the Commission and the President of the Council already stated, I think we really have to take also to seize the momentum to draw the right lessons of what happened. Yes, we acted quickly and in a good speed during the last 2 or 3 days. No, I think we were too much, there was too much hesitation the last 3 to 4 months. And I think we lost some possibilities and opportunities to react on what was happening. And I think in the Greek case, due to all kinds of reasons, most of the reasons have related to the case itself, I think we were a little bit, we could have had more speed in the reactions. So the lessons to draw, I would say, well, it was already stated, we have to have a real economic union instead of a monetary union only. There is a monetary union, we have a common euro, and like Herman said, it's the most important achievement since, at least since the single market was launched. It's the most important achievement. It's something all our citizens of the Eurozone share, so we have to defend it. But I don't think we were always so consequent to know that when you have a single currency, you have to have a kind of common economic policy. To give one example, since the launch of the euro, the imbalances in competitiveness between some parts of the Eurozone have increased. And so the cohesion policy should be an answer to that, but we have to acknowledge and to see today that there are still very important imbalances in competitiveness. So economic governance concerning the public finance, but also concerning the competitiveness. Functioning of the labor market, the cost of labor, the productivity. I think you can't have a single currency and a single euro and still have it within the decades coming when you still have these kinds of differences in competitiveness. So we should work more on that. Secondly, I think that it has already been said during the last years, but we have to act on this. We really need industrial project, industrial vision technological common vision, or maybe some emblematic projects. In fact, we have them, like Airbus, for instance, is a tremendous success. We have high-speed trains, but I think we need more industrial projects, common projects that can, let's say, have some where people can believe in and our economic operators can believe in. Thirdly, I think we should be more present on the global level. In most of the global issues we are discussing now, we are showing the right example, but it's, I think as a matter of fact, that we still have a lack of leverage for this moment. I just have to repel the case of Copenhagen, where we were gathering with the 27 countries and having a very offensive and good standpoint and position, but other powers of the global market and global political system were deciding apart from us in other meeting rooms. So this should not be repeated. But to sum up, I think it's a very good decision that was taken. It was taken just at the right moment. I think we lost some time. We have to draw lessons of what has been happening. We lost some time during the last 4 to 5 months. And the most important lesson must be that you can't have a single currency when you don't have, of course, common defense mechanism, but moreover underlying a common economic policy, reducing the public debt, reducing the imbalances, also the imbalances in competitiveness. And Belgium is certainly prepared to give more possibility, more room of maneuver for the European institutions to act and to act representing our country. I mean, the Commission has to have the possibility to make proposals, and we have to decide on it and to put in place the budgetary and other means to accomplish the goals.
Thank you, Prime Minister. President Barroso, the economic policy is very much based now on the Agenda 2020. And we need in Europe, we need growth, we need innovation, we need jobs. So actually, the Agenda 2020 cannot be disassociated from the crisis management at this particular moment. Could you tell us a little bit more about those longer-term aspects, and particularly Europe, and so all those debts one day have to be paid back? So how do you see the longer-term, the medium and longer-term picture?
Yes, precisely. We have defended when we made a proposal for what we call now EU 2020 strategy, so strategy for the economic growth, sustainable growth in Europe for the next years. We have underlined what we call the holistic approach. That's why we cannot separate that strategy from other aspects of the European Union, namely the Stability and Growth Pact, so macroeconomic stability, public finances stability, the global agenda. We cannot today look at Europe or any other part of the world in separation from the rest of the world, and also some of the acquis of our European process, namely the deepening of the single market. So it is about a holistic approach, as we have suggested, Professor Schwab. It's not only about the programs or the concrete projects we have now in the EU 2020 strategy. But what is the core of EU 2020? The core is growth. We need to restore growth. The crisis, the global financial crisis, has affected in Europe and in other parts of the world the growth potential. We need more growth in Europe, but not any kind of growth. We are insisting on a more sustainable, inclusive, smart growth. That's why we are trying to insist on these new sources of growth. It starts with good public finances. Let's put it clearly. Some of our member states have been living above their means, and this is not sustainable. So when we speak about sustainability, we should also think about sustainability of public finances. That's why things are linked. So even if from a legal point of view we keep the Stability and Growth Pact separated from the EU 2020 agenda, those things are in fact linked. And what we are asking is member states to look at these matters in a coordinated manner, addressing the imbalances. We have seen in the euro area some imbalances growing, and at the same time making investments right for the future, investment for the transition to a lower carbon economy, make an investment at European level in some of the interconnections that will make us make the most of the internal market. There is an untapped potential still in the internal market. Today, I'm going to receive a report I've commissioned to Mario Monti about some ideas how to deepen the internal market. In fact, when you look at the internal market in Europe, we have it in terms of goods, but there are still many missing links in terms of services and in other areas. That's why we are also looking at energy, some of the most important interconnections, to have a real internal market for energy, and making investments of the future, you know, the investments in knowledge, investments in everything that can make Europe competitive, relying on what are our advantages, the human resources we have in Europe. In fact, we cannot, for the growth of Europe, lower our standards. In Europe, citizens want to keep what we usually call the European social model, or a social market economy. That's the name we have put in the Lisbon Treaty, social market economy. So the solution is not to lower our standards, the solution is to be more competitive and to invest in those new sources of growth. This is what the European 2020 strategy proposes, of course, based on reinforced economic policy coordination, and see how each member state can give a contribution to this agenda. At the same time, what we can do in respect of the principle of subsidiarity, what we can do at European level. Some of these investments have to be done at European level with community instruments. Others rely on a decisive, committed, determined action by our member states.
President Van Rompuy, all what we are doing now on the European level requires European solidarity. And we have seen just last week, and actually yesterday, how some of Europe's main member or largest member countries go through internal difficulties to choose a government or to have a government in place which really can undertake action. How do you see it from a political level? I mean, is Europe, are the European countries capable to live up to all those expectations under all the internal pressures? And I would add here, I have heard this morning Christine Lagarde, who said some of the aspects will have to be ratified, if I'm not mistaken, by European parliaments. So what does it mean for the actionability of all those decisions?
Mm-hmm. Of course, it is only the result that counts. We are judged not by our intentions, but not by the way we took a decision, but by the outcome. The result is the most important thing. And for instance, in the case of Greece, we acted in solidarity. And governments who faced internal problems regarding this decision of helping Greece took their responsibility. They took their responsibility, even with the risk of electoral disadvantages. I am very cautious in what I'm saying. They took their responsibility, and it's the outcome which is the most important thing. Second, every country, I was Prime Minister for 11 months, but every government, every Prime Minister has to act in a climate of rising populism. So we need more than ever, political courage. And a lot of countries are ready to take, and I reiterate, their responsibilities. This is the moment for political courage in different circumstances in most of our countries. But we are ready, and most of them are ready to take those responsibilities. Solidarity inside the Eurozone, but also solidarity inside the European Union. But the decisions of the ECOFIN Council were not decisions in the Eurozone. That were decisions taken by the 27. Because all our economies are linked not only on a global way, but also in a European way. when there is a crisis in the Eurozone, even for the 11 members who are not members of the Eurozone, it has a lot of consequences. So we showed also that we have common interests, common values, and that there is solidarity. I repeat, in circumstances in each of our countries which are more difficult than 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think the Eurozone, and I would add some positive word on all this, the Eurozone has fundamentals which are sound compared to other countries. Our budget deficit is almost half of what is going on in other important countries in the world economy. Second, we have a balance of payments almost in balance. So when you have a budget deficit compared to others who is half of that deficit, and when you have a current balance of payments in balance on the current account, you have a strong argument for having a strong euro. Our problem is that inside the Eurozone, there are huge divergences in economic development. And we have to tackle these divergences, having more convergence in economic policy and economic development. And that's why we have to make huge efforts the coming years to have more economic governments to tackle those divergences. When I took office, the 1st of January, my main message was, in complete agreement with the Commission, my main message was, we need to double the economic growth potential which we now have. If we do nothing, we have a structural economic growth of 1%. With 1% growth, we can't finance our social model anymore. With 1% growth, structural growth, we can't play a role in the world, in world economy. We created the G20. It was the European Union who created the G20. But in order to play an important role in the G20, we need more economic strength and more economic growth. So when I took office, it was in the perspective of the famous word, it's the economy stupid, but I prefer the word of the Count of Saint-Simon 200 years ago when he said, tout pour l'industrie, tout pour elle. Everything for the economy. In industry, that's 200 years ago, but tout pour l'industrie, tout pour elle. Tout pour l'économie, tout pour elle. That's why I started this mandate with that team, and we hope that in the 2 years coming period of my mandate, we can go further. We can go further in economic governance to tackle those divergences in the Eurozone so that we have even stronger euro in 2 years than we have today.
It's an important motto, which you just said, but Prime Minister, when we want to stimulate growth and you have a debt burden, and I know Belgium in the past has had special experience in dealing with high debt burdens. What is your recommendation? I mean, in Europe we will have an average debt burden of close to 80% at the end of 2010. How can we combine this debt burden and the need to pay back one day those debts with the stimulation program with the EU 2020?
Well, first of all, maybe two elements I would like to add to the public debt debate. First of all, the yen zone, Japan, has a public debt of almost 200 GDP points, and the public deficit in the United States is almost double as the Belgian one. And still there is confidence in the dollar zone, so everything is relative. I think we have to be very careful, especially for a member state like Belgium. Although now we are a little bit, well, let me put it the other way, we are wondering where the European institutions and where we all were when the situation of Greece during the last years and maybe the last decade worsened. Because what we have seen now is, well, they say it's a lack of statistics and so on. But anyway, the fact is that during the last maybe 10, 15 years, the budgetary situation concerning deficits and so on in Greece went the wrong direction, and there was no reaction from the European institutions. But to come back to the question, for a country like Belgium, we have been choosing for a mix of, on the one side, keeping into place the policy of having sound public finances and the application of the stability program. On the other hand, giving stimuluses to the market and to the consumer and investors' confidence. And we stick very well, I think, to the 3T program of 3T criteria, which were put forward on a very intelligent way by the European Commission. The stimulus package had to be timely targeted and temporarily. I think we did that. And that gives us now the situation where Belgium seems to be reacting in a better way than the most other member states to the economic crisis. The purchasing power has been stabilized. The increase of unemployment in Belgium is only half of what was the increase in the European Union. And also concerning the growth, our achievement is just above the European average. So I think we have to continue this way. And given the fact that in other countries the public deficit is much more higher than in Belgium, the historic situation we have since almost 30 years of a comparatively higher public debt, well, the situation is improving, and we will, if this continues during 2-3 years, we will be in the bunch with the other countries. So to sum up, I think we have to continue the policy we have now, a prudent mix of stimuluses, and on the other side, keeping in place this budgetary policy to have a sound budget and to stick to the stability program. I would add a single word. The big challenge, I think, for a society like Belgium is whether the social partners, the economic and social partners that negotiate wages and so that negotiate the salary costs, are prepared to let's say, to put some, to make some efforts, to pay some efforts to have lower wages, to put the competitiveness of our industry also from that point of view at the #1 place in the targets they are pursuing.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I will ask the co-chairs to raise some issues or to make some comments. Any of the co-chairs? Okay.
Unprepared, but I'll wade in. The Prime Minister raised and I think President Van Rompuy raised the issue of populism. And one of the things that strikes me, regrettably, is the unwillingness of governments and administrations to deal with the fundamental issue. I mean, I somewhat relieved this morning to read the details of the proposed package, the $1 trillion package. And the steps, and the markets are obviously extremely relieved this morning and are bouncing back, recouping much of what they lost on Friday. But it strikes me that there is still not this fundamental determination to get ahead of the curve in dealing with deficit reduction. I mean, I was in Washington last week with the Business Council, and the thing that struck me most was the gridlock that you see in Washington, and the unwillingness to deal of the administration, the Obama administration, to deal with the fundamental issues of deficit reduction until we get the sort of crisis that we've seen in Greece. I just really wondered, some observations from each of the three participants as to why is it, I mean, I suppose the answer is self-evident. Nobody's willing to do that because politicians are in the business of being elected, not necessarily doing the best thing in terms of the long-term strategic economic interest. But why is it that we cannot get ahead of the curve on this?
President Barroso.
I think this is a very important point. The Greek crisis, and not only the Greek crisis, has shown that we should not forget about some fundamental imbalances and should address them. And rightly, you point that the problem of deficits and the problem of debt is not an European exclusive or European specialty. It's a very, let's say, wide problem. That is one of the reasons why we, for instance, favor the discussion in the G20 of those imbalances. Just last week I was in China speaking with President Hu and Premier Wan and suggesting this to our Chinese partners. They should not see that as a pressure. But we have to look at those fundamental imbalances of the global economy, namely the problems of debt at global level, and of course the relation with trade, and relation also with some monetary imbalances. Having said that, member states at European level should address this issue as a matter of priority. It's true that because of the financial crisis, there was the need for some kind of stimulus to the economy to avoid deep recession, but we have already stated that we should now prepare what we usually call the exit strategy. And the Greek, and not only the Greek problem, was a very powerful reminder that we cannot forget about the need for, let's say, a fiscal rigor and macroeconomic stability. That's why I think governments should now take advantage of this situation to address the real problems of competitiveness. The reality is that, namely in the euro area, because of the euro, there was what I call an illusion of prosperity. Since there was no longer the devaluation possibility, some countries were indeed living above their means. And now the reality is back. There was an illusion of that prosperity, but now the reality is back. And so this is the time not only to reduce the deficits, not only to reduce the debt, but also the time to make some structural reforms that sometimes have been postponed in terms of labor markets, in terms of relation of the public sector with the rest of the economy. And indeed, there is a political challenge here. Do we have the political courage to do it or not? Because sometimes these are not very popular programs. But I believe that's the only way to do it. And at least from the European institutions, that is the message that has been conveyed from the Commission, from the European Central Bank, and from European institutions in general. And I hope that this message is now really understood, and first of all, that the lessons are drawn from this crisis.
President Van Rompuy, would you like to add, and Prime Minister?
Yeah, yes. I don't completely agree with the statement. Remember that not longer than a year ago, everyone was asking for fiscal stimulus, deficit spending, neo-Keynesian policies, and so on. The deficit was even good. And we are now, a few months later, and so, oh, you are capable. Most governments aren't capable to tackle budget deficits. So in 1 year, the critic was you do not enough. You are not taking enough initiatives to tackle the economic crisis, and you need more fiscal stimulus. And now it is you are not courageous enough, and you have to decrease the budget deficit. I think the European Union took initiatives. Most of the member countries are in what we call a stability program, so that year after year the deficits are lesser and lesser. The most important thing is the direction, not so much the level, but the direction, going again not only to a deficit of 3%, and we have to go in each of our countries to a deficit of 3% in 2012, 13 or 14, but going even to balanced budget, because we face also the cost of the aging of the population. So we are, all of us, in some kind of exit strategy, and the stability plans of each country are proven that we are in that kind of exit strategy. We can do it. I was myself Minister of the Budget in the 90s. When I started, we had a budget deficit of 7.5. 6 years later, we had a balanced budget. We haven't changed society. We took measures, a lot of measures, some unpopular, others going more in the direction of more efficiency and productivity of the public sector. We privatized a lot, we restructured a lot. So without revolution, we managed to have a balanced budget, and we can do this again in each of our countries. We haven't to wait, of course, but we can do it again in a gradual way, step by step. I'm convinced the democracies, even in a climate of populism, can do it. That's my main message. Second, we have not only budgetary imbalances, we have also imbalances in the balance of payments, inside the Eurozone and outside the Eurozone. And when there is one lesson to be drawn inside the Eurozone from this crisis. We had a close look, not close enough, but we had a close look to budgetary developments. But the underlying structural problem, economic problem, that we neglected to tackle this problem. When some countries have balance of payments deficits of 10%, or even 14%, and we do nothing, or we haven't done nothing, or not enough, then really we missed an opportunity. And we have a further look to the underlying economic conditions in which a lot of countries are working. And that's the main aim of economic governments, to tackle that kind of problems of competitiveness, because competitiveness lay behind the deficits of balance of payments. So we have to work now on budgetary reforms and economic reforms at the same time. It's a huge agenda for most of our countries, but we can do it. I'm convinced that we can do it. We did it in the past, we shall do it in the future.
Prime Minister, Leterme.
I fully agree with that last point, so yes, we can, also in Europe. But the crisis being one of the demand, it was very clear that we had to have put in place stimulus packages. And once again, I would say that we, for instance, coming from Belgium, that we really stick to the TTT, the timely, temporary and targeted criteria that were put forward by the European Commission. The other side of the medal is that in a country like Belgium, for instance, where most of the people still are on their jobs, still have their employment, most of the citizens didn't experience the crisis at all in their purchasing power. And so this gave us the opportunity to have a consumer market which is still functioning quite the right way, and have maybe an economic growth figure which is a little bit above, and based on this consumer confidence, a little bit above the European average. The whole of the question is now if we will be able to strengthen, like Mr. Van Rompuy says, the competitiveness. And there, of course, the debate on the salaries and wages is a very important item, besides the structural economic policy, where the European Union, I think, should be more active and given more room of maneuver, starting from the member states. Mm-hmm.
Let's take one last question. Professor Halberstadt? Yeah. Who?
Thank you. Gentlemen, you have applied a transformational shock, potentially transformational shock, overnight to the European Union. The question, of course, arises, what will the tests show? This morning's tests from the markets suggest that you are applauded. You have done well, you have received applause. There is, however, another test to come. That is in the Eurozone parliaments, and maybe in the European Union parliaments. There needs to be a debate, and understand that doesn't need to be an approval, but there needs to be a debate about these measures, about your package, and about your short and long-term recipes. What is the upside potential is clear. That will lead to what you have painted. What is the downside risk? What if there is no unanimity? What if the populism, which you talked about before, does creep up?
Who would like to? Prime Minister?
Well, until now there was really no problem in Belgium. Belgium being a very European well, a very positive attitude towards European integration. We passed a bill about the bilateral loan to Greece some week ago. And as far as I'm informed, the package that was decided upon last night will not need a parliamentary ratification. Of course, we will have the debate, but I can say that almost a little bit more than 1 month before parliamentary elections in this country, this is not a matter of debate today. People, I think, still have a very positive attitude towards the European Union. The euro for a country that is one frontier, I must say, and so all other countries are so close from Brussels and from Belgium. We only have 30,000 square kilometers. So for the people, it's a very positive element to be able to use the euro. And I think they are prepared to see their politicians take the responsibilities. I think until now, but maybe the President of the European Union as a citizen of Belgium will say something different. I don't think it's an item of public debate today.
President Rompuy.
In Belgium it is not an issue, but Belgium is one of the 16 member states of the Eurozone and one of the 27 of the European Union. But again, the most important thing is the result. Almost all national parliaments voted for the financial support for Greece. Even if in some countries there was quite a lot of discussion about all this and even resistance in public opinion, but they took their responsibility, they showed political courage and they voted. And that is the most important thing. And the climate is not the most positive climate in most of the countries for solidarity in general. We live in a period of rising individualism. But again, the outcome is the most important. And I'm quite confident that citizens are fully aware of the importance of the stability of their money, the euro. And at the end, they will agree with what we took as measures in each of the member states and also in the measures of financial support, because it is in their own interest to convince them that it is in their own interest. That is an argument which can be the most important argument in a climate of rising populism. But at the end, the result will be okay. And I'm quite convinced of that. This is a moment of courage, this is a moment of responsibility, and we will succeed.
President Barroso.
Since I'm in this round table with the Prime Minister of Belgium and the President of the European Council, a very distinguished Belgian citizen, let me tell you that I want to pay tribute to Belgium, to the constant support of Belgium to the European integration and the way Belgium has always supported European institutions. But your question, if I understood correctly, was not just about Belgium, it was more in general. And for me, the answer is leadership. Just one word, leadership. We need strong leadership. People are wise. Citizens are much more wise than sometimes politicians. According to latest polls, for instance in Greece, the majority of the Greek citizens support austerity measures. We should not be misled by the images of television of some, of course, protests. The majority of the Greek people support austerity measures. But for this, we need leadership. We need courage of the political leaders to show that we are indeed in a dramatic moment. And for Europe, for our societies, is indeed a question of, sustaining or not the kind of life we believe in. So I believe that in democracy it is possible to make the case for some of those reforms. But for this we need leadership. Leadership, of course, at European level, but also leadership at national level. And if we achieve this, I think it is possible to counter some trends that exist here and there of populism, sometimes narrow nationalism, sometimes even worse than that, because those trends exist at this moment in Europe as they exist elsewhere. The protectionism as well, the idea of buy what you produce only in your country, the idea of closing. This threat is there, but with determined leadership, I think we can win this battle. At least if we don't trust in the majority of the citizens, if you don't believe in democracy, we should change our business.
Speaking about Belgium, let me just say how honored we are by the presence of His Royal Highness Prince Philip among us. We are coming to an end, and I'm very pleased that our discussion took place showing the whole complexity of the issue, and not just, let's say, dealing with the aftermath of a very dramatic night. If, in order to finish this session, if you had to give a simple message to the normal European citizen who may listen to us today, with, let's say, explaining to him what his position will be inside the European Union in the future, what would you say to him, President Barroso?
I would say, if we want to keep our European model of society with relatively high levels of social cohesion, social protection, environmental protection, we have to understand one thing. We need more people to work longer and to work more. It's only with work. There are no miracles. Work more and work better, of course. So we are at a decisive moment for the survival of our European social model, and only if you are ready to make those efforts, we'll be able to sustain it.
Prime Minister, what would be your message?
I would say that European Union has shown and Eurozone has shown leadership during the last days, and that the fact of living longer, and there's as a consequence working longer and be more people at work, that is worthwhile. That these efforts are worthwhile because there are leaders of the Eurozone that defend the euro and that defend the welfare of the people.
Thank you. I would add to working longer, working more, I would add working in a more entrepreneurial way also.
Better, I said.
Yeah, better, you said. If you close the session, President Rompuy.
Close the session.
With your message.
My message is that we have to focus on the longer term. The longer term to keep our European way of life feasible, and if we want to keep our social model on which we are so proud, which can be an example for the world, we have to take a lot of measures in the shorter term. Measures which are not always as popular as we should wish, but necessary measures. And the necessary measures, as President Barroso said, more in the sense of common sense, because we can't afford such a social model without sufficient economic growth that needs some sacrifices, but is worthwhile on the longer term. And I think if we keep focused on the longer term, I think we have the support of our citizens.
On behalf of all of us, I wanted to thank you for your presence this morning, a very important morning, and I think very important statements. Thank you.
To convince them that it is in their own interest. That is an argument which can be the most important argument in a climate of rising populism. But at the end, the result will be okay. And I'm quite convinced of that. This is a moment of courage, this is a moment of responsibility, and we will succeed.
President Barroso.
Since I'm in this round table with the Prime Minister of Belgium and the President of the European Council, a very distinguished Belgian citizen, let me tell you that I want to pay tribute to Belgium, to the constant support of Belgium to the European integration and the way Belgium has always supported European institutions. But your question, if I understood correctly, was not just about Belgium, it was more in general. And for me, the answer is leadership. Just one word, leadership. We need strong leadership. People are wise. Citizens are much more wise than sometimes politicians. According to latest polls, for instance in Greece, the majority of the Greek citizens support austerity measures. We should not be misled by the images of television of some, of course, protests. The majority of the Greek people support austerity measures. But for this, we need leadership. We need courage of the political leaders, to show that we are indeed in a dramatic moment. And for Europe, for our societies, is indeed a question of, I mean, sustaining or not the kind of life we believe in. So I believe that in democracy it is possible to make the case for some of those reforms. But for this we need leadership. Leadership, of course, at European level, but also leadership at national level. And if we achieve this, I think it is possible to counter some trends that exist here and there of populism, sometimes narrow nationalism, sometimes even worse than that, because those trends exist at this moment in Europe as they exist elsewhere, the protectionism as well, the idea of buy what you produce only in your country, the idea of closing. This threat is there, but with determined leadership, I think we can win this battle, at least if we don't trust in the majority of the citizens, if you don't believe in democracy, we should change our business.
Speaking about Belgium, let me just say how honored we are by the presence of His Royal Highness Prince Philip among us. We are coming to an end, and I'm very pleased that our discussion took place showing the whole complexity of the issue, and not just, let's say, dealing with the aftermath of a very dramatic night. If, in order to finish this session, if you had to give a simple message to the normal European citizen who may listen to us today, with, let's say, explaining to him what his position will be inside the European Union in the future, what would you say to him, President Barroso?
I would say, if we want to keep our European model of society with relatively high levels of social cohesion, social protection, environmental protection, we have to understand one thing. We need more people to work longer and to work more. It's only with work. There are no miracles. Work more and work better, of course. So we are at a decisive moment for the survival of our European social model, and only if you are ready to make those efforts, we'll be able to sustain it.
Prime Minister, what would be your message?
I would say that European Union has shown and Eurozone has shown leadership during the last days, and that the fact of living longer, and there's as a consequence working longer and be more people at work, that is worthwhile. That these efforts are worthwhile because there are leaders of the Eurozone that defend the euro and that defend the welfare of the people.
Thank you. I would add to working longer, working more, I would add working in a more entrepreneurial way also.
Better, I said.
Yeah, better, you said. If you close the session, President Rompuy.
Close the session.
With your message.
My message is that we have to focus on the longer term. The longer term to keep our European way of life feasible, and if we want to keep our social model on which we are so proud, which can be an example for the world, we have to take a lot of measures in the shorter term. Measures which are not always as popular as we should wish, but necessary measures. And the necessary measures, as President Barroso said, more in the sense of common sense, because we can't afford such a social model without sufficient economic growth that needs some sacrifices, but is worthwhile on the longer term. And I think if we keep focused on the longer term, I think we have the support of our citizens.
On behalf of all of us, I wanted to thank you for your presence this morning, a very important morning, and I think very important statements. Thank you.